The morning started like any other. Soft light touched the quiet street, birds made small sounds, and Mark stepped out of his house holding a cup of coffee. He expected a normal day. But the moment he looked at his front door, he stopped. Something was wrong. There was a bright orange paper taped right in the center of his door. Bold letters were printed across the top, HOA violation notice. Mark sighed. He walked closer and slowly pulled the paper off the door. His eyes scanned the words, and his eyebrows rose in disbelief. The notice said his classic truck, his father's old 1970s beauty, was breaking neighborhood appearance rules. The HOA demanded he move it out of sight within 48 hours. Mark shook his head. "This has to be a mistake," he whispered. The truck wasn't ugly. In fact, most neighbors loved it. Kids pointed at it with excitement, elderly men asked questions about the engine, and even strangers slowed down to admire it. The truck was old, yes, but it was clean, polished, and well taken care of. Mark spent weekends waxing it, repairing tiny dents, and replacing old parts. To him, the truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a memory. A piece of his childhood. His father had restored it with his own hands before passing away. Mark folded the notice and slipped it into his pocket. He looked around the quiet street again. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. As he turned toward the truck, he noticed a woman standing across the street. Her arms were crossed tightly, and she wore a stiff smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. It was Karen, the HOA president. She watched him silently, as if waiting for his reaction. When their eyes met, she waved in a slow, almost mocking way. Mark gave a short nod, but inside, he felt uneasy. He didn't know Karen well, but he had seen her walk around the neighborhood like she owned every home. She carried a big binder full of rules and talked to people like they were misbehaving children. Karen turned away and continued her morning walk, but Mark sensed she was satisfied, like she had won some small victory. He tried to brush off the feeling. He walked to his truck, opened the door, and placed his coffee on the seat. As he leaned inside, he noticed something else, another piece of paper, this one stuck under the windshield wiper. His stomach tightened. Another warning. He pulled it out. This one was written by hand. The message was short. Move this eyesore. Final warning. No signature. No official seal. Nothing. Mark's jaw tightened. This one wasn't from the HOA. This was personal. He looked around again. A curtain from a nearby house quickly moved. Someone had been watching. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Mark took a deep breath. Not today, he muttered. He didn't want trouble. He had a long week of work ahead, and the last thing he needed was a fight with the HOA. He walked back into his house and sat down at the kitchen table. The two papers lay in front of him, the official orange notice and the mystery handwritten warning. He called the HOA office number printed on the orange paper. After a few rings, a voice answered. HOA office. This is Linda speaking. Hi Linda, Mark said. I just got a violation notice about my truck. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There was a pause. Your address? Mark gave it. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Linda said quietly, "Oh, that one." That one? Mark repeated. I mean, she corrected, "Yes, I see the notice here." It was filed by President Karen directly. Mark rubbed his forehead. Can I know the reason? The record says the truck doesn't meet neighborhood appearance standards. That's not true, Mark said calmly. My truck is well maintained. I understand, Linda said softly, but once Karen files something, it's hard to. Her voice stopped. Mark heard a door open on her side of the call. Then a faint, sharp voice. Is that about the truck? Give me the phone. It was Karen. Mark straightened. A second later, Karen's voice filled the line. Mr. Walker, I hope you saw the notice. We expect full cooperation. Karen, Mark said. This is unfair. My truck isn't a problem. Nobody has complained. Oh, but someone has, she replied quickly. Many people. I care about the beauty of this community, and your truck simply does not fit. Mark almost laughed. Karen, it's a classic truck. People love it. That is your opinion, she snapped. And in this neighborhood, the HOA rules are what matter. There's no rule about classic vehicles, Mark replied. Not yet, Karen said slowly. But things change. Rules update. A chill ran down Mark's spine. Rules don't update out of nowhere. Not legally. Karen continued, her tone cold and sharp. You have 48 hours. After that, fines will start. And if you ignore them, further action will be taken. Before Mark could respond, she hung up. He stared at the phone. Something was very wrong. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about the truck. This was about power. He stood up and looked outside through the kitchen window. His truck sat there peacefully, its red paint shining under the warm morning light. But around it, Mark sensed something invisible: pressure, eyes, judgment. Whatever Karen was planning, it wasn't small. Mark took a deep breath. He wasn't afraid, but he had to be smart. No sudden moves. No fighting back too early. He needed to watch, wait, understand. He didn't know yet how far Karen would go. He didn't know the real reason she was targeting him. But one thing was certain. This warning was not the end. It was only the beginning. And Karen had no idea who she was trying to intimidate. 2 days passed, and the neighborhood felt different. It wasn't loud or busy, but it had a strange heaviness, like the air itself was watching Mark. Every time he stepped outside, curtains moved. Every time he walked to his mailbox, a neighbor pretended to fix their garden or sweep their driveway just to glance at him. Mark didn't like attention. He preferred quiet, simple mornings and peaceful evenings. But now every moment felt like a test. On the third morning, he found a small envelope in his mailbox. No stamps. No return address. Just his name written in rushed handwriting. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple message. The HOA is planning more. Be careful. No signature again. Mark looked around. Nobody was in sight, but he sensed someone was close, someone who didn't want Karen to win. He put the letter in his pocket and walked back inside. Maybe, he thought, someone in the neighborhood wasn't happy with Karen's behavior. Maybe he had an ally. But he didn't know who. Before he could think more, he heard a loud knock. Bang. 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 Mark opened the door. Karen stood there with a clipboard, her arms tight against her sides. She smiled like she was taking a school photo she didn't want to be in. Behind her were 2 HOA board members, Tom and Susan. Both looked uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be part of this but didn't dare say no. Good morning, Mr. Walker, Karen said with a sugary sweet tone. We noticed your truck is still parked in the driveway. It's my driveway, Mark replied calmly. Karen ignored that. It has been 48 hours since the warning. You have failed to remove the vehicle. So we are issuing a fine. She handed him a white envelope with a dramatic flick of her wrist, as if she were giving him a royal decree. Mark didn't take it immediately. He stared at her, trying to understand the real reason for this harassment. Karen, he said slowly, I told you the rule you're quoting doesn't exist. And you know that. Her smile stiffened. Rules can be updated when necessary. Not without a community vote, Mark replied. And you didn't have one. Tom shifted nervously. Susan looked at her shoes. Karen gave them both a sharp look, and they froze again. Karen cleared her throat. Mr. Walker, this neighborhood takes pride in looking clean and modern. Your old truck, does not match the image we want. Mark folded his arms. You mean you want? Karen didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Please understand," she whispered, "you are new here. You don't know how things work. People like order. And I provide that." Mark raised an eyebrow. "By bullying people?" Her face twitched. "No. By maintaining standards." Mark looked at Tom and Susan. "Is this what you two signed up for?" They didn't reply. Karen stepped back and motioned dramatically toward the end of the street. "Many neighbors have concerns." "Name one," Mark said. Karen's eyes flicked away. "That is confidential." Mark almost laughed. The lies were obvious now. Karen took another step toward him. "Just move the truck, Mr. Walker." "Why make this hard?" "Because it's my property," Mark said firmly. "And because this isn't about rules." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Think carefully. I can make your life very difficult." Right then, a voice called out from across the street. "Karen! Leave the man alone." Everyone turned. It was Mr. Daniels, an older man with white hair and a cane. He slowly walked toward them, his steps steady but firm. He had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. People respected him. Karen's face tightened. "Mr. Daniels, this does not concern." "It concerns all of us," he interrupted. "You're abusing your power again. This truck has been here for months." Nobody complained. Karen tried to smile. "With respect, you don't understand the new standards." "I understand the old ones," he said sharply. "And I understand you didn't ask us before changing anything." A small group of neighbors stepped onto their lawns, curious. Karen quickly noticed and changed her tone. "We're just following protocol," she said loudly, trying to sound official. Mr. Daniels gave Mark a small nod. "Don't let her scare you." Karen's jaw clenched. She looked at her board members. "Tom. Susan. Let's go." They followed her like shadows. Before leaving, Karen turned and said, "You have been fined, Mr. Walker. More fines will come. And we will not stop until this neighborhood looks the way it should." Then she walked away, her heels clicking angrily down the sidewalk. The moment she left, the neighbors slowly drifted back into their homes. Mr. Daniels stayed. "You've become her new target," he said, leaning on his cane. "Why?" Mark asked. Mr. Daniels sighed. "Power. Control. She likes to pick someone every year. Someone she thinks won't fight back." "Well," Mark said with a small smile, "she chose the wrong person." Mr. Daniels nodded. "Be careful. She doesn't like losing." Mark thanked him and returned inside. He placed the new fine on the table next to the warning papers. The pile was growing. Karen was pushing harder each day. He knew she wasn't finished. He knew she wanted a reaction. But what she didn't know was that Mark had a reason to stay calm. He had experience she couldn't imagine. Training she would never expect. The conflict had begun. And Karen was walking into a battle she couldn't win. The next few days felt like invisible storms rolling through the neighborhood. Nothing loud. Nothing dramatic. But something was shifting, something cold and unfriendly. And Mark felt it every time he stepped outside. It began with strange, quiet things. A neighbor who usually waved at him suddenly looked away. A couple who always smiled now crossed the street instead of passing near his driveway. Children playing with scooters were suddenly called inside the moment Mark appeared. It was as if Karen was whispering poison into the ears of the neighborhood. Mark didn't react. He watched. He waited. He stayed calm. But he knew something bigger was coming. He didn't have to wait long. The inspection team arrives. One morning, a loud engine growled down the street. Mark looked outside and saw a white SUV with a large blue HOA logo on the side. The door opened, and 3 people stepped out. Clipboards. Cameras. Measuring tools. The inspection team. Karen walked behind them, her binder tucked under her arm like a weapon. She looked pleased, almost excited. Mark opened his front door and leaned against the frame, watching them approach. The lead inspector, a tall man with glasses, walked straight toward the truck. Without even looking at Mark, he snapped photos. Click. 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 He photographed every angle, every inch, even the tires. Karen crossed her arms. For documentation, she said loudly, making sure neighbors nearby heard. Mark stayed silent. The second inspector knelt down and measured the distance from the truck to the driveway line. The third walked around checking the road, the curb, even his trash bins, as if searching for anything to use against him. Karen finally spoke directly to him. "We're doing a full home compliance check," she said with a fake smile. "Standard procedure." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Funny. None of my neighbors seem to be getting one." "Oh, they don't need it," Karen replied. "They follow rules." The inspectors continued their circus, taking notes like they were discovering a crime scene. One of them pointed at a tiny weed pushing through the side of the path. "Possible yard violation," he said. Karen nodded. "Write it down." Mark almost laughed. "A weed? Really?" "Rules are rules," Karen snapped. One inspector checked Mark's mailbox, running his fingers across the metal. "Mailbox paint slightly faded," he said. Mark stared. "Are you serious?" Karen smiled. "We value a clean community." Then the third inspector, a short woman with a high voice, walked up to the truck and pressed something against the window. A measuring tool. She was measuring the height of the truck. Karen clapped her hands softly. "Make sure it doesn't exceed the allowed height." Mark shook his head slowly. "There is no rule about vehicle height." "There will be," Karen said under her breath. But he heard it. Anonymous complaints. When the inspection ended, Karen opened her binder and held up several printed sheets. "These are official complaints from your neighbors," she said proudly. Mark scanned the sheets. Every complaint had the same writing style. The same wording. The same mistakes. They weren't from neighbors. They were clearly written by one person. Karen. Mark met her eyes. "You wrote these yourself." Karen stiffened. "How dare you accuse?" He held up one sheet. "The handwriting matches your meeting notes." Tom and Susan, the board members standing nearby, looked suddenly uncomfortable. Karen shot them a warning glare. Karen snatched the papers back. "These complaints are filed. That's all that matters." Mark didn't respond. Silence scared people like Karen. And she hated silence. "We'll be back in 2 days," she said sharply. "Expect further action." She turned and walked away with her little army behind her. But before she reached her car, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This truck will be gone. I promise you that." The neighborhood turns. That afternoon, things grew worse. A neighbor named Lisa walked past Mark's house. She normally waved and chatted. But today she only rolled her eyes and muttered, "You're ruining the community." Another neighbor placed a note under his door. "Stop making trouble. Do what the HOA says." Someone else left a flyer in his yard showing a fancy neighborhood with modern cars, no classic vehicles anywhere. It was social pressure. Organized pressure. Karen's specialty. But Mark wasn't shaking. He had seen far worse. Much darker things. Things these neighbors would never imagine. Night visitor. That night, around 11 p.m., Mark heard something outside. He walked to the window and quietly looked through the blinds. A flashlight. Someone was standing near his truck. He stepped outside silently, moving like a shadow, and approached from the side of the house. A young man from the neighborhood was crouching near the truck, taking photos. Mark spoke softly. Can I help you? The man jumped so hard he nearly dropped his phone. Karen asked me to take pictures. At night? She said the lighting helped show flaws. Mark stared at him. The man looked scared, ashamed. He wasn't bad. Just pressured. Mark nodded slowly. Go home. The man ran. Lines are being drawn. The next morning, Mark found a new letter on his porch. This one wasn't in handwriting. It was typed. Cold. Official. Direct. Further action will be taken in 24 hours. HOA President, Karen Fleming. Mark folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. His patience was running out. But he still waited. He needed to let Karen dig her own hole. And she was digging fast. He walked to the window and looked at his truck. Clean. Polished. Perfect. Then he whispered to himself. Let her try. She has no idea who she's dealing with. Because soon, the real showdown would begin. And Karen's biggest mistake was thinking Mark was just another homeowner. The morning the storm arrived, the sky looked too normal. Too quiet. A soft breeze moved through the trees as if the world didn't know trouble was coming. But Mark felt it. In his bones. In the air. Like the slow rise of a drumbeat before the battle begins. He woke up earlier than usual. Not because of noise. But because of a feeling. A warning inside his mind. He walked to the window, pulled the blinds a little, and froze. A tow truck. A huge, bright yellow tow truck was parked at the end of the street. The engine was off, but the driver sat inside, tapping his fingers nervously on the wheel. Behind the tow truck stood 3 HOA vehicles. And in front of them, like a general leading her troops, stood Karen. Clipboard in hand. Chin high. Eyes sharp with victory. Mark whispered, "So, today is the day." He didn't panic. Instead, he calmly made coffee. He poured it slowly, took a breath, and walked outside. The moment he stepped onto his driveway, the HOA team moved like they had been waiting for that signal. Karen raised her hand. The inspectors from last week spread out. The tow truck driver started the engine with a loud grrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr quietly. Others walked outside pretending to water their plants but really wanting to witness the drama. Karen strutted forward with a proud smile. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." "Karen," Mark said. "You seem calm," she said sweetly. "That's good. Acceptance is important." Mark gave a small smile. "Acceptance of what, exactly?" She lifted her clipboard like it was a holy book. "The HOA has decided to seize your classic truck today. You ignored 15 fines and refused compliance. We have official authority." Mark didn't answer. He simply watched her. Karen took that silence as weakness. She waved the tow truck driver forward. "Hook it." The driver stepped out hesitantly. He looked at the truck, then at Karen, then at Mark. Something in his face showed he didn't want to do this. Karen snapped, "What are you waiting for? Do your job." The driver swallowed hard and walked to the back of his truck, pulling the heavy chain. The metal scraped against the ground with a low, cold sound. "SHNNGGG, SHNNGGG." Mark stepped closer to his classic truck and put a hand on the hood. "Karen," he said gently, "you're making a mistake." "No," she said with a grin, "you made the mistake when you thought you could challenge me." The inspectors gathered behind her, nodding like obedient followers. Tom and Susan stood farther back, looking stressed and unsure. Karen lifted her voice so all neighbors could hear. "This eyesore will leave our neighborhood today." A few gasps came from nearby houses. People loved that truck. They didn't say it aloud, but their faces showed it. The tow truck driver took a breath and moved to attach the chain to the classic truck's front axle. Mark stepped forward. "Don't," he said calmly. The driver froze instantly. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was controlled. Powerful. Final. Karen laughed loudly. What are you going to do, Mark? Call the police? Cry? Please. This isn't your world. This is HOA territory. Mark looked directly at her. Last chance, Karen. She rolled her eyes. Driver. Hook. The. Truck. He tried again. His hand trembled as he reached for the chain. Mark closed his eyes for a moment. He really didn't want to do this. He had been patient. He had waited. He had allowed her to push, to cheat, to lie. Because he wanted the truth to fully expose itself. But now she had crossed the line. He opened his wallet. Karen noticed the motion and smirked. Oh, look, everyone. He's going to show us a coupon or something. Then she stopped. Her eyes locked on the shiny badge inside Mark's wallet. An FBI badge. The world went silent. The tow truck engine hummed quietly. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Neighbors stepped out, stunned. Tom took a step back. Susan covered her mouth. The inspectors froze like statues. Karen blinked once. Twice. That's fake. Mark snapped the wallet shut. Want to test that theory? She opened her mouth but no sound came out. Mark spoke slowly, his voice calm but sharp like a blade. I am a federal agent, Karen. I work on fraud and housing corruption cases. I've been watching you. Every fake rule. Every forged complaint. Every illegal fine. Every act of harassment. And now attempted property seizure. Karen's face turned pale. No, you can't, this isn't, you didn't tell us. I didn't have to, Mark answered. I moved here undercover. Gasps erupted from every yard. Karen took a step back as if she had been physically hit. This is a misunderstanding. Mark raised a hand, silencing her instantly. I gave you chances. I gave you warnings. But you kept going. You broke laws. You pressured neighbors. You forced signatures. You even changed rules without voting. All illegal. One of the inspectors whispered, "Oh my God." The tow truck driver backed away quickly, dropping the chain. Karen swallowed hard, eyes darting around. She looked trapped. Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You tried to bully the wrong man. Karen shook her head, her voice cracking. This wasn't I didn't, it's the board. They told me. Tom raised his hands. No, we didn't. You told us everything was voted on. Susan nodded nervously. You pressured us into signing things. The inspectors stepped back from Karen. One dropped his clipboard completely. Mark straightened. His voice echoed across the street. Karen Fleming, you are under federal investigation. Neighbors erupted in whispers, shock, and disbelief. Karen covered her mouth. No, please. For the first time since Mark moved into the neighborhood, Karen had no power. No rules to hide behind. No fake documents to wave. Just fear. Deep, real fear. Mark turned to the tow truck driver. You're free to go. You did nothing wrong. The driver nodded quickly and left. Karen stood trembling, gripping her binder like it was a life jacket in a storm. But Mark wasn't finished. Not yet. He had just begun. Tomorrow, everything would blow wide open. The air in the neighborhood felt heavy, almost like the sky itself was holding its breath. The tow truck had already left. The inspectors had walked away with shaking hands. And the neighbors, they stood frozen in small groups, whispering in shock, staring at Mark like they were seeing him for the first time. But the loudest silence came from Karen. Her face, once full of power, pride, and confidence, was now pale and trembling. She held her binder so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The fake smile she always wore had completely disappeared. Mark didn't move at first. He stood with calm posture, breathing slow and steady. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just quietly powerful. The kind of calm that makes the whole world listen. Tom, the HOA board member, finally broke the silence. Is this real?" he whispered. Mark looked at him. Yes. Susan took a small step forward, her voice soft. FBI? You're actually FBI? Mark nodded once. Slowly. Firmly. The neighborhood gasped again, as if the truth was too heavy for the air. Karen stumbled backward. And no, this is wrong. This is not fair. You tricked us. You tricked the whole neighborhood. No, Mark said. I followed the law. You broke it. Her eyes widened. I was only trying to keep this place beautiful. That's my job as HOA president. Your job, Mark replied, is to follow federal and state regulations. Not rewrite rules. Not invent complaints. Not target homeowners for personal reasons. Karen's lip quivered. I didn't target you. Mark looked down at the stack of papers she dropped earlier: fake complaints, illegal rule changes, and forged signatures. You did, he said, from day one. The truth begins to spill. A neighbor, a woman in her 50s named Alice, stepped out of her house holding a gardening glove in one hand. I knew something was wrong with those new fines, she said loudly. We never voted on anything. Another neighbor joined. She charged me a fine for a birdhouse. A birdhouse. Then another. My welcome mat was too bright, she fined me for that. Voices began rising. People who had stayed quiet for months finally spoke. The street filled with complaints, stories, anger. All directed at Karen. The Queen of Rules was now surrounded by her own wrongdoings. Karen shook her head rapidly, pointing at Mark like he was the villain. This is your fault. You came here to destroy me. Mark stepped forward. No. I came here because we received reports of HOA corruption in this district. People were scared to speak. People were bullied. People were forced to pay illegal fines. He pointed at her binder. And all the evidence we needed? You collected it for us. Karen blinked fast. I didn't mean harm. I was trying to keep order. Mark tilted his head. Order? Or control? Karen's silence was the answer. The board breaks away. Tom finally stepped in front of Mark. He looked defeated, tired, but also relieved. Agent Walker, he said, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. She pressured us. She made us sign blank forms. She filled rules after we signed. We were scared to say no. Susan nodded quickly. She threatened to remove us, fine us, even embarrass us in meetings. Mark nodded. You will both need to give statements. But cooperation helps. They both nodded again, grateful that someone was finally taking control. Karen looked at them like they had betrayed her. You're blaming me? After all I did for this neighborhood? Tom muttered, You mean after all the chaos you caused? Susan whispered, We just wanted peace. Karen's last attempt. Suddenly, Karen straightened her posture. Her trembling stopped. Her eyes hardened again. I'll sue all of you, she snapped. I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer. You forged legal documents, Mark cut in. No lawyer will save you. I didn't forge. Mark opened her binder. The neighbors leaned in. Inside were blank HOA forms with fake signatures. Rule change sheets dated after fines were issued. complaint letters all typed in the exact same format. A list labeled, Trouble Homeowners, Target List. The crowd gasped. Karen lunged forward to grab the binder, but Mark closed it with one hand, firmly. "You're done, Karen," he said quietly. Those 3 words held more force than any shout. Karen stepped back again, shaking so badly she could hardly stand. The weight of truth. Neighbors circled around. Not to attack, but to witness. People who had been silent for a long time finally spoke freely. "She fined me for the color of my curtains. She entered my backyard without permission. She told my kids they couldn't play outside after 7 p.m. She threatened to have my dog removed." Complaint after complaint hit Karen like waves crashing on a sinking ship. She covered her ears. "Stop. Stop it. I was doing my job." "No," Mark said firmly. "You were abusing your job." Her hands slowly lowered. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes, not from guilt, but from fear. Real fear. Am I going to jail?" she whispered. Mark didn't answer immediately. He wanted the silence to settle. He wanted her to feel the weight. Finally he said, "That depends on the investigation." Karen couldn't breathe for a moment. The binder slipped from her hands. "Mark makes it official." Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black folder, official FBI documents. The seal shined under the sunlight. "This," he said loudly so the entire neighborhood could hear, "is the beginning of a federal inquiry into HOA corruption, misuse of authority, harassment, and fraudulent rule enforcement." Neighbors gasped again. Karen slumped to the ground, whispering, "This can't be happening." Mark continued. "Effective immediately, Karen Fleming is removed from all HOA duties until further notice. She is not allowed to fine, inspect, or approach homeowners." Tom and Susan let out a long, relieved breath. Neighbors clapped. Some cried from happiness. Some hugged each other. Karen sat on the sidewalk staring at nothing, her world crumbling around her. Power shifts. Mark turned to the crowd. "Everyone here will have the chance to give a statement. No more fear. No more silence." People nodded eagerly. Then Mark walked to his truck, the truck that started all this, and placed his hand gently on the hood. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was proof. Proof that one small spark of injustice can reveal a whole fire beneath. He turned back to the neighborhood. "Karen thought she could take this truck," he said. But what she didn't know was that she just exposed herself. The entire street erupted in applause. Karen closed her eyes tightly. The reveal was complete. And the fallout was only beginning. The neighborhood, once tense and strict under Karen's rule, now felt strangely awake. People stood in small circles, whispering with excitement. Some were relieved. Some were confused. Some were still trying to understand how their strict HOA president had fallen in one afternoon. But the one person who did not move was Karen. She still sat on the sidewalk like her legs had forgotten how to function. Her binder lay open on the ground, pages scattered around her like broken pieces of a collapsed kingdom. Her eyes were empty, staring at the road as if it could give her answers. Mark watched her for a second. Not with anger. Not with pity. Just calm professionalism. Then he walked away to begin what he came here for, the real investigation. The neighborhood turns honest. Tom and Susan hurried to Mark with a stack of documents they had collected secretly for months. "We were scared to say anything," Tom said quietly. "Karen always said she had connections." "Connections?" Mark raised an eyebrow. Tom nodded. "She said she knew people who could make our lives very hard if we reported her." Mark almost smiled, because he had heard this line thousands of times from corrupt officials trying to hide their crimes. "Good," Mark said. "Your cooperation will help you." Susan looked relieved. "We will help in any way." Mark took the documents. They were messy, unorganized, but full of useful evidence. Unauthorized rules. Unapproved fines. Complaints rewritten in Karen's handwriting. Intimidation letters. Everything Karen had tried to hide was finally coming into the light. Karen's fear grows. While Mark worked, Karen finally stood up. Her legs were shaking so much she had to hold onto a mailbox. She watched Mark talk to neighbors. She watched them hand him papers. She watched her own power crumble more every minute. Her voice cracked. "You people, you all are smiling now? After everything I did for this neighborhood?" Alice, the woman with gardening gloves, snapped back, "You didn't help us. You scared us." A young man added, "You fined my sick mother because she forgot to pull out her trash can." Another shouted, "You told my son he couldn't leave his bike outside." Karen covered her ears again. "Stop. Stop talking." But the truth didn't stop. People were finally brave. And Karen had no one left. Mark's hidden team. A black SUV suddenly turned into the street. Quiet. Sharp. Official. The doors opened and two agents stepped out, Agent Ramirez and Agent Cole. They wore the same calm confidence as Mark. Karen gasped loudly. "And no, more of you?" Mark turned to her. "This is standard procedure, Karen. You are part of an active investigation now." Agent Ramirez approached Mark. "We got the call. Ready for evidence collection?" Mark nodded and handed them the binder and the documents from Tom and Susan. Ramirez flipped through a few pages and whistled. She really dug her own hole. Cole added, "This is enough for a full, formal inquiry." Karen stumbled backward again. "Why you can't do this?" "I was helping. I was protecting the neighborhood." Mark didn't raise his voice. "Karen, no one elected you queen. You're a volunteer. Not a ruler." Neighbors laughed quietly. Karen turned red with shame. Door-to-door truth. Mark and the two agents began knocking on doors. House by house. Family by family. Story by story. Every home had a complaint. Every homeowner had a memory of fear. Every story matched the pattern. She threatened me with fines. She came to my home uninvited. She changed rules without asking anyone. She told me she'd destroy my file if I didn't obey. Even the children talked. She yelled at my little brother for drawing with chalk on the driveway. She told me my dog barked too loud and she'd call animal control. Every small detail added more weight to the investigation. Agent Ramirez wrote fast. Cole recorded statements. Mark listened carefully, connecting every piece. The neighborhood was finally free to speak after years of silence. The board breaks apart completely. While Mark collected statements, Tom and Susan had a private moment of guilt. "We let this happen," Susan whispered. Tom nodded. "I know. But we were scared." She used fear like a weapon. Susan looked at Mark across the street. "At least it's ending now." Tom exhaled. "Yes. Because someone finally stood up to her." Karen's last lie. Karen watched the agents walk from house to house. She grew more desperate with every passing minute. Her authority was gone. Her reputation in ruins. Her neighbors turning against her. She tried one last attempt. She marched to Mark, though her knees could hardly hold her. "You think you're a hero?" she hissed. "You think these people will thank you when this neighborhood falls apart? When rules collapse? When things get ugly?" Mark turned slowly. "Karen, the only ugly thing here was the way you treated people." Karen's voice cracked again. "I saved them. I gave them order." "No," Mark said firmly. "You controlled them. You bullied them. You scared them." He stepped closer. "Real leadership never needs fear." Karen looked away, tears finally falling. The agents find the hidden files. Agent Cole returned with a surprise. "Mark," he said, "you need to see this." He handed Mark a small USB drive. "A resident said Karen dropped this in their yard last week. Probably by mistake." Mark plugged it into his secured tablet. Inside were folders labeled Secret, Do Not Show Board, Fines List, Future, Target Homeowners, Updated. The crowd behind Mark gasped as he scrolled. This was no mistake. This was planned corruption. A system of control. Future targets. A list of people she wanted to punish. Mark finally closed the tablet. Then he turned to Karen. Her face went white. "You kept secret files?" he asked calmly. Karen whispered, I. But the words never came. She knew she was finished. The neighborhood watches the fall. Agents Ramirez and Cole approached Karen. "Karen Fleming," Ramirez said, "we are placing you under temporary detainment for questioning related to HOA corruption, fraud, and harassment." The neighborhood erupted in shock once again. Karen looked around wildly. "At least someone defend me," she screamed. "Someone. Anyone. Please." But no one moved. Not one person. Because fear was gone. Mark gave a small nod to the agents. They gently but firmly led Karen to the SUV. She didn't fight. She didn't shout. She just cried. Slow, quiet tears for the power she would never get back. Closing moment. When the SUV drove away, the neighborhood felt lighter, like a storm had finally passed. Mark exhaled slowly and looked at the people around him. "This is only the beginning," he told them. "There will be meetings. Reforms. New elections. You're going to build this community again, with fairness this time." The crowd nodded, grateful and hopeful. For the first time in years, the street felt peaceful. And the real healing could finally begin. 2 weeks passed since the day Karen was taken away in the black SUV. 2 weeks since the street felt fear for the last time. 2 weeks since the neighbors discovered the truth hiding behind forced smiles and fake rules. Life in the community changed slowly, but every day felt a bit brighter. The flowers looked brighter. The lawns looked happier. Even the air felt lighter, like everyone could breathe again. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. A neighborhood meeting like never before. For the first time in years, the community held an open HOA meeting, a real one, not the silent, forced gatherings Karen used to run. People filled the small community hall. The chairs were packed, and some people stood at the back. There were kids on laps, dogs on leashes, and neighbors who hadn't smiled in years now laughing freely. At the front table sat Tom and Susan, but this time they were not nervous puppets. They were ready to rebuild. Mark stood to the side, arms folded, observing quietly. He wasn't there as an agent now, he was there as a neighbor. Tom tapped the microphone nervously. "Okay, everyone, let's begin." The room fell quiet. "For years," Tom began, "this HOA was run by fear. And we allowed that. We didn't speak up. But today, that ends." A wave of soft applause filled the room. Tom continued, "We want to start fresh. We're stepping down. It's time new people lead. Fair people." The room clapped louder. Mark noticed something he hadn't seen here before: unity. Karen's fate is revealed. Just as the meeting continued, the doors opened. Agent Ramirez walked inside, holding a folder. Whispers spread instantly. He walked straight to Mark and handed him the file quietly. A beat of silence. Then Mark stepped forward and faced the community. "You all deserve to know the results," he said. The room went silent again. Karen Fleming has officially been removed from the HOA permanently. She is banned from serving on any housing board for life. Relief spread across the hall. "But there's more," Mark added. People leaned forward. After reviewing the evidence, the state determined she committed multiple violations: fraud, intimidation, and misuse of authority. Susan whispered, "What will happen to her?" Mark spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "She will pay fines. Heavy fines. And she will be monitored for a long time. She avoided jail because of cooperation, but her reputation, her power, her control, it's gone." No one cheered. No one clapped. They didn't need to. Justice was enough. Mark's truck stands proud again. The meeting ended with new voting plans and fresh hope. Neighbors shook hands. Kids played outside again. Dogs ran freely. As Mark walked back toward his house, he noticed something surprising. A group of neighbors had surrounded his classic truck with cleaning supplies, polish, and cloths. Alice waved him over. "Come on, Agent Mark. We're giving your truck the love it missed." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to do that." Tom smiled. "We want to. That truck represents freedom now." Susan added, "When Karen tried to take it, it showed us how far she had gone." Mark chuckled. "Well, I won't stop you." Together, they cleaned it for the first time as a community. Every wipe, every laugh, every joke felt like a new chapter. The truck, once used as a reason to attack Mark, was now a symbol of unity. Karen's last attempt at control. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. A small white car slowly drove into the neighborhood. Windows tinted. No music. No movement inside. Mark, walking back from the mailbox, watched it carefully. The car stopped in front of Karen's old house, now empty, her belongings already removed by her family. Then the driver's door opened. It was Karen. She looked thinner. Older. More tired than anyone had ever seen her. Her confident walk was gone. Her sharp eyes were dull. She carried no clipboard. No binder. No rule book. Just guilt. She stared at the houses she once controlled, and the people she once scared. Some neighbors stepped out, but not out of fear, out of curiosity. Karen looked at Mark. "I came to apologize," she whispered. The street went silent. Not because people forgave her, but because they never imagined hearing those words. Mark stayed calm. "Karen, the neighborhood is healing. Let it." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't realize how far I went. I just wanted everything perfect." "Control is not perfection," Mark replied quietly. Karen nodded slowly. "I know." She took one last look around, her voice breaking. "I just didn't want to disappear." Mark softened a little. "Then live better. Somewhere else. Not through fear." Karen wiped her tears, nodded, and got back into her car. The car drove away quietly. This time, nobody followed her. Nobody shouted. She was gone. For real. A new start for everyone. Weeks passed. The new HOA board was elected, 3 kind neighbors who used transparency instead of threats. They held open meetings, allowed suggestions, and treated every resident equally. People painted their fences freely. Kids drew chalk art on the sidewalk again. Dogs barked without fear of fines. And Mark? He finally felt like he belonged. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Mark leaned against his classic truck and watched the street. The laughter of kids. The chatter of neighbors. The breeze through the trees. A normal neighborhood. A peaceful neighborhood. A neighborhood free from fear. Ramirez texted him. "Good job, Walker. Case closed." Mark smiled and finally allowed himself to relax.